Thanks to all of you for being here and joining this big group discussion. It's been so wonderful to hear a diversity of perspectives and projects all across the spectrum of research and psychedelic science. I'd like to start by opening it up to the panelists themselves. Does anyone have any questions you'd like to ask of a fellow panelist, or any big topics that we'd like to start the discussion with? Paul is raising his hand. Go ahead, Paul.
Yes, I would like to ask Dr. Crisco, when you were sitting with people comparing psilocybin the molecule versus psilocybin the mushrooms, what was reported that was most interesting in comparison?
In the cohort that had the opportunity to both do psilocybin mushrooms and the synthetic, we had a number of people that did the synthetic who had had previous therapeutic sessions with exemptions with the psilocybin mushrooms. And so they were the ones I interviewed after the sessions were over. And the ones that had the psilocybin mushrooms, the ones that could compare it, said the psilocybin mushrooms, they come on at a nice gentle slope. Anyone that's had psilocybin journey comes off at a nice gentle slope. There's the transformational time at the top, and then a gentle slide coming off the other end. And they felt that that was a really nice space to be able to integrate and start thinking about what they had just gone through. Whereas those that are on the synthetic say it's more like a box, it's more like a rocket ship to the moon, transformation, and then a quick elevator ride out. And when asked which ones they preferred, they all across the board said that they preferred the whole mushroom experience, as especially the gentle slide on the outward, where it gave them just more time to be in that space to really contemplate.
Thank you. Any other questions between panelists? Okay, I'm going to start by asking some of the top-rated questions that have not yet been answered. Many of these seem to be addressed to anyone. The first is, can someone elaborate on the influence of psychedelics on metaphysical beliefs, including any concerns regarding the ethics of such changes and consent? Robin?
Sure, happy to. My postdoc now, Chris Timmerman at Imperial, led on a study that is published with changes in metaphysical beliefs being the focus of that study, and we combined data from naturalistic observational, a prospective approach, before and after. If you don't realize, prospective is you collect the data before the event and then track changes over time after the intervention. And then controlled research data, it was data, I think, from our depression trial, I think in the singular, and shifts away from hard materialism is how we worded it. So a belief that everything, all experience comes down to the brain. Brain causes experience and places all the emphasis really on brain and materiality, towards a more dualistic and idealistic view, mind as fundamental, consciousness as fundamental. Also, panpsychism, a move towards that. So it was quite an intriguing and challenging finding. It's funny, I heard the consciousness researcher Anil Seth comment on that study and its finding, and he said, I was kind of blown away by the results, because if ever there was evidence for, he's a kind of hard materialist, but for materialism, it was, that they took a drug and had an experience and changed in this way. So it was a curious finding. It actually correlated with improvements in well-being, that shift away from the hard materialism. And the lesson I took there is that anything that you grip too hardly, even materialism, you can overshoot with, So that kind of softening, maybe not softening to an extreme of, say, hard idealism or hard panpsychism, everything's conscious, but some kind of, softening of your position may be the thing that we picked up on there.
Thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in on that topic? Chris?
I'll just say I think it introduces an interesting aspect to consent. And when I was an OHSU med student, like 2006, I, as a student, went and enrolled as a participant in a nitrous oxide study, and it was nitrous oxide to test, and they wanted to test your eye pressure during nitrous to see if they could use it in kids to do eye exams. And the consent form was like 1 page, and it was like, we're gonna lay you on a table, give you nitrous, test your eye pressure, and that's done. So I go in, the mask comes down, and I'm in, multiple different lifetimes and universes, talking to aliens, and then that, dematerializes and the nurse is there, and that was just like, there was no consent for that experience. And so it's challenging because you don't want to lead anyone, you don't want to give them all the options of things they might experience, but it's just an interesting.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, this is such a complex and really important topic in consent and psychedelics, and yeah, I don't know that we need a specific line saying you may encounter aliens, but it sounds like it might have been helpful for you. But yeah, really good point. Okay. So there are a lot of questions here. I'm not sure if this is directed to someone in particular. I didn't catch this coming up, if so, but folks are wondering why ADHD is not considered a good candidate for psychedelic therapy, given the theory on faulty anti-correlation of the default mode network with task-positive networks. Anyone want to tackle that?
All I'd say is it's not as simple as that. I wouldn't put it all. Arguably, already too much has been put on the default mode network, and some might say I'm culpable for that. But I'd love to be culpable for writing that excessive narrative or rewriting it. I think it's really not about one network at all. The data doesn't support that now. Yes, it's part of the picture, but there are other high-level networks. And to put a particular diagnostic category on the DMN and its anti-correlation with, even that can be questioned, actually, its anti-correlation with this other network. So it's not as simple as that. And I don't think you can go from brain like that and infer a therapeutic action at this stage. We don't have enough of a mastery on brain to do inferences like that.
I just wanted to add, too, that there's almost nothing more powerful or complex than human attention, and that, everyone has a different experience of attention, and we can have a different gain on our attention, and we all have both innate things that, automatically grab our attention, and also things that we choose, things that are salient for us. And so I think that, maybe it is possible that for some patients, some of the time, some therapies might be valuable, but for us to always remember that it's really that all of these individual differences also account for a lot.
Thank you.
For Dr. Carhart-Harris, folks are wondering how should psilocybin dosage be adjusted for patients on SSRIs?
Gosh, okay. Well, I guess this is...
Now that's a big question.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't know, and I don't think any of us know, and that work hasn't been done systematically to be able to say. So people would do trial and error in the wild, so to speak. Maybe I overuse that term sometimes, but and find their way to a dose that seems to be working, but we don't know scientifically how to do that. I think this is coming up and maybe pointed to me because in our recent depression trial, psilocybin versus escitalopram, we had people discontinue their antidepressant medications to then come into the trial. And that split the two conditions by response. Because remember, it was two groups, and people either went on to the SSRI again, if they'd been on one, or they had psilocybin therapy. And so if you come off an SSRI or an antidepressant more generally and go onto a pure SSRI, you actually did pretty well. But flip it the other way, if you come off your SSRI and then get psilocybin, it attenuated the response. So at least in our data, it seemed to be a sort of condition-specific effect that, in a sense, diluted the difference between the groups. Because if you looked at those who hadn't discontinued any meds, they were med-free, they did fantastically well with psilocybin and not very well to the SSRI. So it was a confounder in a sense. And there could have been a few things that contributed to it, technical stuff, down-regulation of the target 2A receptor, or it could have been a bias because half the group discontinued meds, so they were more med-friendly, and half of the group weren't on meds, so maybe they were med-averse. So it was a complex one, but it made a big difference to the data.
Thank you. So here's a big one. This is for anybody. How can we hold space to challenge myths of psychedelics while recognizing that there are outliers who have negative experiences?
Is it pointed to me again?
It's a really big one.
I should defer it.
Go for it, Robin.
It's all about the salience you put on things. You can elevate that salience. And so I just think that we should look at the worst cases because not to then increase the gain on those worst cases, but just to log them so that we can make comparisons between treatments. And if we don't do that, then people can make things up about the risks. So that's another thing about collecting data. I know you can refute how to interpret data, but at least you've got the data. So and it was just a suggestion that there's another way to look at data than averaging. It's something that I'm realizing more generally with, I guess, the science that we do, that you can. People could say, well, for balance, why don't you look at the extreme positive? And sure, you could do that too. Yeah.
If I can add to that, I think this is also, maybe this sounds like a plug for open, but I am a fan of this idea that if, we have an incredible opportunity here to get data on the use of psilocybin across a broad swath of people where they're relatively less controlled who is getting the substance. So our clinical trials, having been involved in running one, I realize how much screening there is involved, and it is this small slice of people that actually get in. And we're going to have this huge swath of people and the chance to be able to actually see, what is the rate in that less screened sample? What is the rate that people have problematic experiences? We'll start to get real, good data on that if we can get broad participation in these anonymous data collection efforts. And we don't need to wait 5 more years or whatever it is before the FDA approves it, before we start to get that information. I think it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, if it's all right, very briefly to follow on there was a sense that, like I said, these specters that hang over psychedelics, maybe they did more historically things like induced psychotic disorders, but there was a sense of but what is the risk? We don't really have any data. We've got some population data. It doesn't seem to be an association between psychedelic use and psychotic disorders. But, unless there was a sense that maybe the surveys we're doing are just collecting bias samples. Even though it's prospective, it's still people who want to show you how well they're going to do on a psychedelic. So it's unless we actually go actively hunting for, say, induced psychotic responses or HBPD or, depression's getting worse, or we're not going to know. So that was one reason why we did it. What did we find? I don't know. I was left with a sense of there was nothing that alarming. I don't know if that came through, but it was a short study. But when we did that, there was nothing that alarming that didn't say when this happens, there are contextual factors that are really the key causal factors.
Okay, I like this question. And for anybody to answer, what do you think we can learn out in the field in Oregon that is different from what we can learn in a clinical trial?
I have an idea about that. I think that, if you look at the kinds of questions that the NIH thinks are valuable to answer, or any other funding body for that matter, right? They're focused on pathology. They're focused on things that are quantifiable, things that we have validated measures for. And that's fine. That's one way of doing things, but it's not the only way. And one of the things that I have always loved about 109 is that it is so much more than just the questions that the NIH is interested in. It's so much more than just the questions that your PCP or your psychiatrist would be interested in. I think that we have a lot of opportunity to learn about what it is to be a human, what it is to have a consciousness. This is a really huge laboratory of consciousness. That's what I'm really excited about.
I love that. Measure 109, Laboratory of Consciousness. That's great. Pam.
I want to build on what you just said. That's what the microdose.me study was about, was a prospective observational study to see exactly what was happening in the real world. And I think one of the lessons I learned from that is when we put all the measures in that study, I definitely was coming from the bias of what I wanted to know as an MD. And what I love about people is they reached out and said, hey, what about us? I am microdosing. We are microdosing. Us mothers are microdosing. Us women are microdosing for all these other reasons that you didn't put in the study. So we met with them. I had amazing meetings over the last year with all sorts of folks that were microdosing for other reasons. And for that reason, all that is now in version 2, because we can't do those clinical trials, but we certainly can ask people, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Is it working? And then that kind of research, that kind of information then informs us as to where we should go with the clinical trials. And so I think that's what we can learn from in the wild, right? Is what are we doing in the naturalistic setting? And then we can study it and see if it's true. I mean, it's true if people say it's true, but, we can check the regulator's box and say it's also true in the study.
Yeah. I just wanted to make a plug. I know this is more simplistic, but to my mind, there is such an important role for Oregon to play in establishing safety. So for up to me, I would say safety is objective 1, 2, and 3. And I'll tell you what I'm thinking about. I am thinking about another kind of phenomenon where Oregon was a national leader, and that is death with dignity. So I did some research on death with dignity in the early days before it was legal anywhere. And, the huge controversy in the medical field at the time was, are these just people who aren't getting enough pain treatment? Is this going to be safe? Is this going to turn into some kind of, a huge conglomeration that we won't be able to stop, right? There was so much worry about that. And what stopped that was the data that the Oregon Health Authority collected on every single person that requested and received death with dignity under the legislation. That data made it crystal clear that it was safe, that it wasn't wackos who were asking for this. It was, in fact, people who were suffering horribly. And physicians and providers who were witnessing that suffering and had exhausted everything else. It put to rest the idea that these were people who were rejecting hospice, they just want to do this, everybody was on hospice. So I think that kind of data in Oregon would be so important in getting to a point where the DEA would reschedule all these medicines, right, that would make clinical trials much more available. And I totally get that there's this other possibility out there, but my plea would be safety.
Any other thoughts on that one? Okay, well, I'm going to ask a related one, because this feels like a good topic to end on. What are some top priorities for Oregon legislators and advocates if they are looking to improve and evolve Measure 109?
I'm an Oregonian, so I have a dog in this fight. I think one of the most important things that we need to do is demonstrate to our redder counties that this isn't just the drug people doing the drug things, right? That this is an issue for veterans. This is an issue for people who have experiences with social poverty. This is a service that is uniform to the human experience. So I think that one of the things that we really need to be able to do is provide equitable services across all of our counties for all of our citizens. To me, that level of access is of critical importance.
Anybody else have thoughts about that? Okay, well, these are the big questions. Ones that are left might be a little more specific. Oh, here's one. What are, if you had to pick the main scientific measures that should be collected if we were collecting data on every Oregon client?
Well, the Who 5 is quite good. It's 5 items. But one thing that we've done at Imperial has been to use short measures and develop short measures. No one wants to do the 240-item neopi or whatever it is. They just don't. If you're going to look at personality, keep it short and sweet and have a good reason for looking at it. So you always need to have a reason and have a short measure and think to yourself, can I capture this thing in just, sometimes just 1 or 2 items, and often you can. And yet it's just as predictive with 1 or 2 items than with a broader scale. So be efficient. Redundancy and efficiency is so important with this because people don't love doing surveys, but it's so important that you collect that data. So short ones, validated ones as well, ones that people recognize. It's important.
And whoever was interested in that question, I guess I'd encourage you to keep an eye out for the paper that comes out of the study that is currently being done, the Delphi study that Todd Corthius is running as part of Open, that has like 30 experts from all kinds of types of involvement with psilocybin who are there to answer that exact question. And so in a few months, that paper will be out, hopefully, and we'll have at least this expert consensus. I don't know, you've been doing the qualitative coding, I think, haven't you? Is there anything that comes out of that, or? Not to put you on the spot, I don't know.
Alyssa's been doing more than
I've been doing that.
Was it Alyssa? I like that you were part of it. Okay, yeah.
Anything that's come out of the Delphi coding?
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything you'd want to mention that comes out of that.
I'd say the biggest one, Chris hit it earlier, is really how we're measuring informed consent and what goes in informed consent, and making sure that that is really hitting the main sections of what we need to be communicating to clients. So that's not as much outcomes data, but that's been the most consistent so far. And of course, like informed consent and ethics around touch and boundaries and those sorts of things. So we've got just a few more minutes left, and I'm wondering if anyone has any parting words or a burning desire to share anything.
I had one reflection. I was really grateful that you shared, you were transparent with the music that you were using in your study. I think that, I have a bias, but I think that that is one of the more important things that we can be systematically reporting on, both in terms of the timbre and the content, but also the sort of biographical association, right? Whether a person has experience with this kind of music, whether it's entirely novel, all of that kind of stuff. I think there's enough evidence out there to suggest that the music is an incredibly important part of the setting. And I think that that's a really big area of opportunity. So thank you for your transparency.
Oh, thank you. Well, it all started in your lab.
Well,
Yeah.
Mendel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is something that I don't think any study has addressed, but my last deep journey on psilocybin, I was open to the cosmos and laying on the ground in a very comfy blanket. And my lover, when my eyes were closed and I was totally blissing out into hyperspace and the unanimity of being and just feeling so wonderful, she slipped a frozen strawberry into my mouth. It was the best strawberry I've ever tasted. And I just highly recommend this. Where is taste? I mean, out of the blue, I mean, it was fucking incredible. So I'm just letting you know that frozen strawberries are really a great idea. Okay.
All right, Paul, it sounds like you've given your consent ahead of time for frozen strawberries in all situations. Keep that in mind. Anything else? Or should we leave it at frozen strawberries? Okay.